Alright, today we're going to read chapters 48 and 49 of Serafina and the Twisted Staff by Robert Beatty with the permission of the author and Scholastic. Chapter 48. The next morning when Serafina woke up in the workshop in her human form and walked outside onto the grounds, she looked out across the mountains and came to a realization. It was through the darkness of the blackest night that she had come to love the brightness of the rising sun. That morning, Mr. Vanderbilt and Braden formed a work crew of nearly 100 men from the estate's stables, farms, and fields, and they went out to the animal cages. Serafina and her pa went with them. The troop of men and horses encountered no difficulties on the way. When they arrived at the pine forest, Mr. Vanderbilt and the other riders dismounted and entered by foot. They found the animals still in their cages, but the campsite had been abandoned. The fire cold, nothing but gray ash. Serafina couldn't help but carefully scan the forest, looking for any evidence that Uriah might have somehow survived the battle the night before, but saw nothing. He appeared to be truly gone. Braden knelt down in front of one of the cages, opened it up, and helped the red fox crawl out. Recognizing him, the fox came to him immediately and crawled up into his lap. He held the fox in his arms and soothed it with strokes of his hands. "Everything's all right now," Braden said as he petted the fox. After a few moments, the fox seemed stronger of both body and spirit and trotted off into the forest. Braden went to the next cage and freed a beaver from its imprisonment. As he opened the cages, some of the animals immediately ran into the forest. Others needed his care. He knelt down with them and held them until they were strong enough to be on their own way. He freed raccoons and bobcats, otters and deer, swans and geese, and the weasels and the wolves. It filled Serafina with joy to see the animals running free and running strong. "Stay bold," she told them in a whisper. As Braden freed the animals one by one, Serafina's pa and the other workers in the crew used their crowbars, chisels, and hammers to tear out and destroy the cages so they could never be used again. At the end of the day, as they traveled back to Biltmore, through the oaks and chestnuts, the elms and spruce, Serafina thought that the character and spirit of the forest through which they traveled had changed. Scurries of flying squirrels ran up and down the trunks and glided from tree to tree. Otters played in the streams. "Look up there, Serafina," Braden said, grabbing her arm in excitement. She gazed upward and saw thousands of birds, streams and streams of them, flooding across the clear blue sky. There were skeins of geese flying in echelons of V's, swans and ducks in long lines, and clouds of fluttering waxwings, cardinals and jays. "Isn't it magnificent, Serafina?" Braden asked, his voice filled with wonder. "I'm so glad you're here with me to see this, because I would have never been able to describe it. Did you ever think you would see something like this in your whole life?" Serafina stood with Braden, watching the birds, and she smiled. "Not like this," she said. Chapter 49. Serafina sat in a red damask upholstered gold chair in front of a French-style vanity, table, and mirror in the Louis XVI room, on the second floor of Biltmore House. Light poured into the beautiful oval-shaped room with its curving white walls, red draperies, and golden brown wood floors. Esty stood behind her, brushing Serafina's long, silky black hair. "I don't know what happened to your hair, miss, but it's beautiful," Esty said as she brushed it. "Thank you," Serafina said, looking at herself in the mirror. All traces of the brown were gone. Only the black remained. And it wasn't shaggy and streaked like before, like a spotted cub's camouflage, but smooth and shiny and entirely black. Her clean, bare neck and shoulders showed the scars of her past, the jagged wounds she'd taken to her neck when she destroyed the black cloak, the bites of the wolfhounds on her arms and upper shoulders, and a new cut she'd suffered fighting Rowena and her animals, a long scratch across her cheek just below her eye. The appearance of the wounds did not bother her. They were the scars of battles fought and battles won. But she still had one worry. "How has Mrs. Vanderbilt been?" she asked. "She's been down sick on some days, but then she perks up. No one expects it of her this year, but, she likes to give Christmas presents to all the children of the estate's workers. She's been sending me and the other girls hither and yon for all sorts of gifts. She and I spent the entire morning wrapping up the presents and putting them under the tree." "You must be excited about the Christmas Jubilee tonight," Serafina said, smiling. It was good to hear that maybe Mrs. Vanderbilt was feeling a little better. "Oh, yes, miss, I can't wait. But after all the ruckus last night, I hope it's quieter tonight. or old St. Nick might just look down on Biltmore's rooftop and keep on flying. Thank you again for everything you did, Essie, Serafina said. You saved a lot of people's lives, and you saved the house, too. You should have seen the look on Mr. Vanderbilt's face when I told him everything you said. I've never seen him move so fast. He gathered up your pa and all the other men and the guests and the maids and the cooks. We went to all the places in the basement and the kitchen and the pantries and the stables, and just like you said, there was pine sap and kerosene already aflame. Somebody had lit all those fires. It was so frightening. Your pa said someone cut the wires on the alarm boxes, so he sounded the alarm himself. Then he got the fire hoses throwing water, which was truly something to behold. Mr. Vanderbilt got the bucket brigades going real quick like. Everybody chipped in and worked together, and we put those fires out in no time at all. But it could have been a disaster. Serafina smiled as she listened to Essie tell her story. You're right, she agreed. It could have been a disaster, but it wasn't. You saved us. Serafina smiled. Oh, sorry. It wasn't me. It was everybody. Everybody working together. Serafina nodded in agreement. But what about you, miss? Essie said. A lot of strange happenings last night. Strange happenings? Oh, all the cats were a-caterwauling, and the coyotes were a-howling, and the horses racing the moon. Noises, screams in the night, all sorts of commotion. Somebody actually crashed a carriage off the bridge by the river, smashed it to smithereens. Truly? Serafina said. I heard that Mr. Vanderbilt checked into that peculiar Mr. Grayson. Turns out he was some sort of shady character who goes around the country investigating ghost stories and ever what. He was a complete charlatan. Maggie and me thinks he and that English girl tried to run off in the carriage together. That's what we think. No one's seen hide or hair of either one of them since last night, and I bet you we're not a-gonna. I bet you're right, Serafina said, but deep down she felt a pang of sadness for poor Mr. Grayson. She remembered the scars on his face. They were not unlike her own. There were just many more of them. Mr. Grayson had been a demon killer, just like she was, but this time the demon had killed him first. Serafina realized that she had made a mistake in her judgment of both Mr. Grayson and Rowena in different ways, in part because of how they looked and dressed, and she vowed to be far more careful next time. You want to know what? Essie said, leaning down to her and speaking in a low, conspiratorial tone. You're not going to believe this, but Maggie said she looked out her window last night and saw a black panther. Do you believe her? Oh, sure. I saw one once years ago. You did? Serafina said in surprise. I wasn't but 5 or 6 at the time, but I recall it like it was yestermorning. One of the clearest memories of my entire life. I was walking down the road with my nanny and my pawpaw, and this big old black panther crosses the road right in front of us. He stopped and turned and looked right at us. He had the most beautiful yellow eyes you ever did see. I was afeared. I thought the panther was going to eat us for sure, and he probably would have done it if it weren't for my pa. I wanted to take off running, and I would have been halfway out of Madison County, but my pawpaw gripped my shoulder. He held me in place, and we just stared at that big cat. That panther stared right back at us, eyes keen, like he was as knowing as you and me. And then he turned and continued on his way. My pa said that them kind are very rare, that there can only be one black panther at a time. So, if Maggie saw one last night, I guess a black one has returned to these parts. Don't want to get it, of course, but I sure would love to see him. As Essie told her story, tears streamed down Serafina's cheeks, and then she began to sob. Essie had seen her father. Oh, miss, I'm sorry, Essie said. What did I say? I didn't mean to scare you. The panther ain't gonna hurt us none. You're such a delicate creature, aren't you? Serafina looked at Essie in the mirror, shook her head, and wiped her eyes. I'm not scared, she said. Serafina, never mind about all that commotion last night. I'm sure it was nothing. My pawpaw would say it was just the old man of the forest up to his tricks again. Nothing to mind. Serafina smiled and nodded and blew her nose into a silk handkerchief from the table. Don't fret none. We're going to fix you up real nice for tonight, Essie said as she stood behind Serafina and worked on her hair. We have plenty of time now. Do you want me to put your hair up into a fancy coiffure like Consuelo Vanderbilt's was the other night? It's very popular these days. Serafina smiled and imagined it in her mind, but then she said, Actually, I have another idea, and explained to Essie what she wanted. She liked talking with Essie and spending time with her. There was something soothing about it that brought her home. Then Serafina saw Essie's expression change, maybe as she thought back on the unexplained happenings and the strange sound she'd heard in the night. "Do you believe in haints and spirits, miss?" Essie asked her. "I believe in everything," Serafina said very seriously, remembering all that she had seen. "Me too," Essie said as she stroked Serafina's hair. "Essie, do you remember when we first met a while back? You were fixed on becoming a lady's maid to Mrs. V's guests," Serafina asked. "Well, that's right," Essie said. "But you know what I reckon?" "What's that?" Serafina said. "On special nights like this, at least, I reckon I'm your lady's maid, miss." "I reckon you are," Serafina nodded and smiled and reached up and touched Essie's hands with her own. "But you know what I want more than that, Essie? I want you as my friend." "Oh, now," Essie complained, "you're going to start me a-crying if we keep this up." At that moment there came a gentle knocking. "Who could that be?" Essie said as she went over to the door. "Don't they know us girls are busy in—" Essie opened the door and saw the young master standing there. She ran out of air to speak. Serafina rose and went over to Braden as the shocked Essie moved quietly backward into the room. Braden held in his arms 2 large white boxes with ribbons. "What's this?" Serafina asked, studying the boxes as Braden smiled. "A Christmas present for each of you," Braden said as he handed the first one to her. "Open it up." "Truly?" Serafina said, but she didn't wait for an answer. Inside the box, Serafina found a gorgeous, creamy satin winter ball gown. "It's beautiful, Braden," Serafina said. "Thank you." "Essie, you too," Braden said, handing the second box to her. "This is to cover Serafina's debt to you." "Oh my, will you look at that?" Essie said, beaming as she opened the box and saw the gown within. "They're both beautiful," Serafina said, watching Essie. Braden stepped closer to them and spoke in a facetiously conspiratorial tone. "Now, between me, my aunt, and Essie, this is the 3rd dress we've given you, Serafina. Perhaps you could try to be just a little more careful and not ruin this one right away." "I'll do my best," Serafina said, smiling, and gave Braden a hug as Essie wiped tears of joy from her eyes.